This week on Getting to Know Jew, we talk with Bailey London Nakelsky. Nakelsky is the Associate Vice President of Leadership Giving at Hillel International, a role she took after 6 years as the Executive Director of Hillel at the University of Southern California. But 2 years ago, she left California for her new home in Kansas City, so we chat about that journey in the field of Jewish philanthropy. Hi, Bailey. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be doing this.
So you've got kind of a wild Kansas City story, having moved here right as the pandemic hit the U.S. in March 2020. But before getting to that, I want to focus on your Jewish story. You are a professional with one of the biggest and arguably one of the most important Jewish organizations on the planet, Hillel International. So tell us, as the Associate Vice President of Leadership Giving, what do you do, and how does your work affect sort of the whole Hillel grapevine from international leadership to the students on campuses?
So in my capacity in the advancement team, I oversee fundraising from individual donors. So we have revenue that comes in from foundations, from individuals, from different sources. And the part of fundraising that I love the most is this individual giving, because it's the human relationship-based giving. So my work really impacts the entire movement because I tell stories of students, of professionals, of donors who've all been impacted by the incredible work that Hillel does, not just on campus, but it really expands out into many communities. And I get to connect people who have philanthropic interest with supporting our work with these meaningful stories on a regular basis.
So can you say a little bit more about sort of when you're telling those stories, what are some of the touch points that you sort of lean on when explaining what Hillel International does, why it's so important to support Hillel? Sort of what's your toolkit as you're doing the work?
We talk about this a lot in our office, especially as we're looking at the way our brand is recognized around the world. And it's interesting, as diverse as our student body is, that's how diverse the stories of impact are. So we hit Jewish young adults at a moment in their life where their interests are so diverse and they're making independent decisions for the first time in their life. So we're providing them with the tools and resources, programs, learning opportunities, trips to visit places around the world at this critical moment in their development where they're figuring out who they are. So my toolbox of stories that I tell really depends on my personal experience, the most recent experiences I've heard from our funding recipients. And I really love to hear the stories of the donors because I'm able to connect almost any interest they have in Jewish life back to campus. For example, my background is in social work, so I'm often drawn to the stories of how our programs are providing support for the whole student and not just one element of their identity. I feel like, how can you sit and study Torah if somebody's well-being is not taken care of? And so I love that Hillel becomes that family for a student who just needs a safe space to explore who they are as a human and then go deeper into their Jewish identity. So I often lean on those stories. But we also have incredible moments of fighting anti-Semitism every day on campus and advocating for Israel and exploring Jewish arts and encouraging tzedek and social justice and encouraging civic engagement and yearning to improve the world and leave it better than we found it. And so the stories are just endless.
I am a little bit curious to ask this since you brought up the topic of anti-Semitism. I know there's often a perception for sort of many Jewish professionals that I know and sort of a feeling among many young Jews that I know that anti-Semitism is obviously something very real and important and something that we face, but almost overtakes the philanthropic conversation a lot of the time. And it's very hard to also sit down and have a conversation about what's great about being Jewish too, and not just that like we're under attack. So I'm wondering, when you're having those conversations, how do you balance the sort of the real need and issues of anti-Semitism and needing to address that, but also making sure that, you know, everything else that's great about who we are and our lives as Jews and the things that happen don't get lost in that as well?
In the Hillel world, we tend to label the everything else you're talking about as the joy of Judaism and wanting to make sure our students and participants have access to find that joy in their Jewish involvement. And we recognize that it's two sides to the story. We nurture and grow and spend most of our efforts, to be honest, in building these rich identities and connections to the joy of Judaism. And at the same time, we recognize, unfortunately, more often than we'd like to see, that joy is under threat. And so we must protect the ability to nurture that joy by fighting anti-Semitism on campus. And it does, I wouldn't say it distracts or takes over. I think they go hand in hand in making sure that our campuses are a safe place for students to express their identity and not want to tuck a Star of David necklace under their shirt when they're walking between classes, but really articulate this joy that they've found in their religious and cultural backgrounds.
So I'm also wondering, since the pandemic started, are there any distinct ways that the field of Jewish philanthropy or gift giving have changed in sort of the way that you engage potential donors and do your job on that count?
Yeah, my head spins a little bit with this question because I go back and forth. On one hand, we used to plan incredible events to bring people together and build community and let a philanthropist sit in a room amongst other philanthropists and look around and be inspired and in awe by the fact that they all have shared values in that space. And we had to quickly pivot and move those kinds of connections to a digital and virtual space, which is hard to look around. Yes, you can look on a screen and see how many boxes of other like-minded people are there, but we have all lost a bit of that warm, fuzzy feeling when you're in a big banquet hall. At the same time, you don't have to spend money on getting your hair and makeup done and the right outfit and how to impress people and when to arrive on time and your travel arrangements to be there. You get to focus on the core values of what you're supporting as a philanthropist. The things that stayed the same to me is I still reach out to people on the same frequency, maybe more because I have more time professionally to make personal outreach calls. I still think of my donors as often as I used to and send little articles or gestures that I'm thinking of them and found a connection to them in the same way. And I'm finding people more likely to say yes to opportunities because they're more convenient and accessible because we've had to adapt in this world. So I tend to look at things through rose-colored lenses, but I think there's a lot more opportunity now to engage deeply. We just have to fight through this impulse that we're used to the rubber chicken dinners to celebrate those deep engagements. And there may be more opportunity if we shrink the size of the audience to be more catered to individual interests. So I'm able to take a group of 10 donors to visit a region of Hillel campuses where I wouldn't have had that same hands-on experience if I was focused on a 300-person gala that same week.
To back up a moment sort of from all of this, let's go back to what made you want to go into Jewish nonprofit work and then to be so hands-on with this sort of fundraising. Like, what's your story? How did you end up here?
My Jewish professional story starts with my personal Jewish story. I was born in Los Angeles. I'm a fourth-generation Los Angeles Jew. And my parents decided they didn't want the chaos of the big city when I was about 9 years old. And we moved to the Central Coast of California. And I went to public school and very quickly realized not only was I the only Jewish kid in my class, but I was the only Jewish kid at the school, with the exception of my brother, who was in kindergarten when I was in fifth grade. And I was young and I felt like the other. And instead of feeling badly as the other, I felt empowered to become more knowledgeable about what made me the other and just share my culture and background and religion with my friends. I was a big reader, so I got really into reading Jewish fiction as a young child and was determined to somehow make that part of my career one day, and I had no idea what that meant. The rabbi at our synagogue encouraged my mom to send me to, or my parents to send me to Jewish summer camp. And I went to Camp Swig, the Reform Movement camp in Northern California. And then it became Camp Newman. And camp became my life. It inspired me to get involved with youth group. It actually influenced my decision to go to the University of Arizona for college. 10 of my friends from camp were all going. So I just went. I never visited the campus. I didn't really look into the academics. I just knew I wanted to be with my camp friends. And the first thing I did when I got to campus was get active at the Hillel. I served in a leadership role throughout my entire college experience at Hillel. Hillel then placed me with an internship as a junior in college at the Jewish Federation of Southern Arizona. I was in their department focusing on Jewish education and was mentored by Sharon Glassberg, who to this day I still hold as one of the best mentors in my life. And through that experience, I was selected to become a Ferrop Scholar, which was a scholarship for graduate school. And I went to Hebrew Union College and USC and earned a dual master's in Jewish nonprofit management and social work. Because I had this Ferrop Scholarship through the federation system, my first job out of school was at a Jewish federation, which I liked. I started in Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County in South Florida. I like to say the federation system is like the teaching hospital for Jewish fundraising. I was like thrown into the deep end of fundraising and terrified. I was only 23 years old when I finished graduate school and had this first job. And I started in women's philanthropy, which is quite possibly the most nurturing, loving environment to have your first job in. I was surrounded by Jewish mothers who not only cared about my professional growth, but cared about me as an individual. And I realized fundraising is relationships. And no matter where I went in my life, if I kept these beautiful relationships, I'd be okay in my career, because the people who I'm introduced to through fundraising work are coming to the organization I'm a part of because of their deep love and care for whatever the mission of the organization is. And how lucky would I be to work with people like that for the rest of my life? I was in South Florida for 6 years, and then an opportunity at my alma mater opened up, and I became the executive director of Hillel at the University of Southern California. And I said this was my dream job. I was 29 when I started there, and I thought, I'm going to retire in this job. I loved the university. I loved Hillel. I loved what an executive director role brought to me in terms of fundraising and budgeting and finance and building operations. But I loved the student interaction. I got to teach. I got to counsel. I got to advocate for these students. I somehow became a faculty advisor for a fraternity, which is something I never saw myself doing. It was such a beautiful opportunity to just fully immerse myself in my career. I loved it. And then life happened, and I married a wonderful man, Josh, who did not live in Los Angeles. And so I needed to relocate, and Hillel International created this role for me when I had to leave USC. Because, like I said before, when you find a job in an organization with a very clear mission that you love and you care about, that organization and the people who support it kind of love you back. And so this has really become a lifestyle career for me.
That's amazing. I feel like that level of institutional culture is like, I hear or I read about it of like, oh, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, organizations were like that. And then it's like nice to hear that some of that still exists today. So it's very cool that, you know, they continue to look out for their own.
Yeah, I mean, Hillel has made a significant investment in talent in general, and they really care deeply about the professionals who are working with us. And it's clear. My son's school is closed, his class is closed this week because of COVID cases, and he's a toddler. So it's very distracting to have my toddler home. And the CEO of Hillel, Adam Lehman, sent us a little treat in the mail to let us know that he was thinking of us and realized how challenging it would be to balance work and having my son at home. And it's just a really thoughtful and wonderful place to work.
I'm also wondering, you know, what did being the executive director at USC Hillel for 6 years teach you about Jewish philanthropy that you sort of now take into this role? And I guess to narrow that down maybe a little bit more, like what are the most important things that you think all Jewish professionals, or maybe just all Jews, should understand about Jewish philanthropy? Because obviously everyone has an idea of what should happen and shouldn't happen. And I think now is also a great time to note that you were so good at your job at USC that you won the Richard M. Joel Exemplar of Excellence Award from Hillel International during the Global Assembly in 2018. So you're definitely the person to ask about this stuff.
Wow, thank you. I think there are some core things I've learned from both working at USC Hillel and just my broader career in general is that philanthropy should feel really good. When somebody's making a gift, it should feel like an extension of their core values. And when I think about that, and I think this is important for early career fundraisers too, when you think about the fact that you're facilitating, allowing a philanthropist to feel good about where their money is going, it's so much easier to ask them to support your work. You know, they're investing in something with a tangible impact. And in Hillel, they can come visit it and see that impact and meet with students whose lives are being changed. And that should feel really good. And if it's not feeling good, this might not be the right philanthropy for them to be involved with. If it feels like a burden to them to be involved with the organization, they're going to find another way to feel good. And that's also important. I really believe at the heart of philanthropy is the donor, and we need to be very donor-centric in the way we think about their impact. So I think that's one piece. Second thing is I've always supported the organizations that I've worked for with my own money, because I want to feel confident that I'm setting an example as a leader of the organization, that I believe in this organization. I believe in its management. I believe in its infrastructure. I believe in the output it's creating enough to invest my own money. And I'm a donor, and I want to be treated like a donor. And I want to know what that donor experience is like. And I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and support something that I believe in this much. And then the third lesson I would take away from my work at USC, Hillel, is that our professionals work really, really hard. And when you're working in the Jewish nonprofit space, there are a lot of blurred lines between your personal life and your professional life. And that's okay, but it's really important to set your own boundaries early on and to articulate those boundaries to everybody else, because they're not always assumed, and to be really clear that this is a job and it's a passion, and sometimes that can be hard to balance.
Sounds like the sort of typical but also ultimate Jewish professional dilemma of like working for the communities that we are in and we serve and all of those things. So after living, working, and learning in California for so long, what made you leave the West Coast for, of all places, a Midwest home in Kansas City? And also asking, given the fact that I have cousins in California and it's such a bubble where so many people want to stay and love it, and it's like the perfect environment for them, and leaving can be kind of a challenge sometimes. So what was your journey on that?
So Josh and I were both born and raised in California. I had brief stints in Arizona and Florida for my education and career, but had returned to California because, as most Californians would say, why would you go anywhere but California? We were living in San Diego in a beautiful condo right off the beach, which is also why would you leave a beautiful condo right on the beach? And I was 6 months pregnant, and we were ready for something bigger and new and different. Josh wanted to change his career a little bit, and I had the privilege of working remotely for Hillel International, and they're very flexible with remote work, assuming I can get to an airport and travel to wherever I need to for meetings. And so we started thinking about what would life be like for this child that hadn't been born yet. And we realized that to get to the JCC from where we were living in San Diego would have been a 45-minute drive anytime we wanted to get there. And we would be house poor in the type of house we had dreamed of raising a family in. And we were ready to buy a house, leave this beachside condo. And I thought, why are we stuck here? Our family lived further north than San Diego, so it was a 3 or 6 hour drive to visit grandparents. And I said, why not take a 3 or 6 hour flight to visit grandparents? And let's explore other communities. Josh has wonderful family in Kansas City, an aunt and uncle who have always been his favorites, and wonderful cousins who also have young kids. And I said, let's just go spend a weekend in Kansas City, and we'll meet with a realtor and say, no promises, but can you show us around where young Jewish families are living? Because we are considering moving here. We spent 1 weekend in January of 2020, and by that Tuesday, we were making an offer on a house that we had seen with this realtor. And we had plans to move the middle of March 2020 when I was very pregnant. And we got in the car. We had moved everything. We sold the condo. The moving truck was almost to Kansas City. We buckled our seatbelts in the car to drive out for our move. And the governor of California had shut down the state and said, this is a real pandemic. Do not leave your home. We had no home anymore in San Diego. So we took our 3-day drive to Kansas City, which was terrifying. As someone who was pregnant, there were no bathrooms to stop at, fast food, hotels, they were all shut down for our drive. This was the week you couldn't get toilet paper in the grocery stores. We arrived in Kansas and we were supposed to stay with an aunt and uncle, but we were worried that we caught something on the drive out. So we got a long-term stay in a hotel, moved into our empty house, and didn't see the family that we moved here to be with for months. We had a baby on our own, and this wonderful family kept dropping off food for us. And it was a pretty crazy experience. But now, almost 2 years later, we have the most incredible group of friends. Our now 20-month-old son is getting this wonderful Jewish education at the JCC CDC, where he is really thriving and making his own friends. And I'm so impressed with the Jewish community here. We've gotten involved in almost every aspect of Jewish life I can imagine. And I can't imagine living anywhere else. So it was a crazy way to start, but we love the Midwest. We love the people, and the lifestyle is so wonderful.
And you no longer have to get stuck in California traffic to get to where you need to go.
No, I'm almost in tears laughing when people complain about traffic here.
So my understanding is, on top of your job with Hillel International, you also work with KU Hillel, coach Jewish Family Services on fundraising, and co-chair the Jewish Federation's PJ Library Committee. After doing all of that, you must be basically like a native Kansas City Jew now, right? You're just sort of one with the community at this point. Like, how can you say a little bit about what it's like being involved in everything?
It's funny, I tend to have a habit of getting involved with everything whenever I move somewhere. It's part of why we actually left San Diego so easily. I had never given myself the chance to get involved there. So I had not set roots the way I have here. I both feel like I'm deeply involved, and I also still feel like the newbie. It's a little bit of a weird COVID experience in terms of getting involved in a new place. I feel like I've made really deep, wonderful friendships with a very limited bubble, because I've only gone to meetings with my fellow co-chair or with a small group of leadership for whatever I'm getting involved with. Or my involvement with KU Hillel is very much limited to Susie, the wonderful executive director there, because we're not taking large meetings, and she hasn't brought me to meet her board yet because of COVID. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, and I'm just so excited as the world slowly starts to reopen, or the weather starts to get warmer and we can do more things outdoors, when I'm not at a stage with an infant newborn where I don't want to go to anything anymore, that I'll be able to even more fully immerse myself and build a stronger community.
That really is kind of the peak Midwest, is waiting for it to get warm enough to actually get together with people at in sort of normal outdoor spaces.
Yeah, exactly.
So classic sort of last question for this podcast. You mentioned this a little bit. Would love for you to expand more. What do you love about the Kansas City Jewish community?
I love how unexpectedly wonderful this community has been for us. Kansas City has everything I could think I need in Jewish life. There are too many synagogues for me to figure out which one is the right one, although I'm pretty sure we've landed where we're going to stay. When we first moved here, my husband got involved volunteering with the Kansas City Mitzvah Garden, and we've met incredible people. And my son gets to run around and pick peppers and tomatoes and mint while we're volunteering and making a difference in the world. And there's kosher food here and Jewish program. And later today, my husband's going to the Auschwitz exhibit at Union Station that I went to a few weeks ago. The culture and the diversity and the opportunities are just so rich. And people always say, why'd you move to the Midwest, Kansas? Are there any Jews in Kansas? And I have so much more opportunity here than I have in some other communities I've lived in.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be on this podcast. This has been great.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Getting to Know Jew podcast is a product of the Kansas City Jewish Chronicle and the Jewish Federation of Greater Kansas City. It is part of the Jewfolk Podcast Network and produced by Jewfolk Inc. Please rate, review, subscribe, and share. If you have suggestions for future guests, please email the show at webmaster@jewishkc.org.